There are some conversations that we must make comfortable in every household and society as a whole. There are also moving stories of perseverance and purpose that not only uplift others, but inspire us all to think and reach higher in hopes of positively affecting someone else. Throughout my journey, I've been fortunate enough to have been a part of some amazing conversations and witnessing wonderful stories of transformation, including my very own. And now I share them with you. Your stories, your narratives, our inspiration. I'm Cory George, and this is One on One. And so today we celebrate some of my favorite people, teachers, more specifically, black male teachers. Growing up in the South, I can recall the sense of security I felt. Whenever I was fortunate enough to see a black male teacher strolling the hallway, I, as I'm sure many other students who looked like me, felt more secure in knowing that I was somehow recognized, understood, and most importantly, mentored. I held them in high esteem because they were the vision of victory that I needed to see, as my life outside of school was often less than favorable. Nationwide, only 2% of public school teachers are black, while students of color make up about half of the nation's public school enrollment, according to the U.S. Department of Education. So joining me today are two exemplary role models for today's youth, poet and education scholar Tony Keith and math teacher leader at Van Ness Elementary School in Washington, D.C., Quay Dorsey. And so thank you guys for joining us. Before we get started in the details, I want to ask you to clarify for the viewers, what is an education scholar?
So yeah, what is an education scholar? And I call myself a scholar because scholars are involved in the creation, in the production, in the dissemination of knowledge, right? And so by that I mean, when you think about scholars, you think about people who write, who read, who publish books or articles about specific kinds of topics. Just so happens that my topic is education. And so as a scholar, I care about that knowledge, how it's produced, what's written about it. And so most scholars you see, I mean, you could think historically, you could think about people like James Baldwin, you could think about folks like Audre Lorde, you could think about even contemporary scholars like Michael Eric Dyson, right? These are individuals who are involved in public intellectual conversations. These are people who, are teaching in front of classes or on stages, but it's that. So scholar is that person who is involved in knowledge production.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
No, it does.
Great.
So, so also, I want to ask you, was this a burning desire for you for, as your life work, or did you happen to stumble into this as a result of something else?
I stumbled into it because of something else. When I was a kid, a lot of my family members and close friends would tell me I was going to be an educator. They would say, Tony, you're going to be a teacher. You're going to be a teacher. I was of the belief that I was going to go work in business and be an entrepreneur. And that's not what happened. What ended up happening was I was in college, and I was the first in my family to go to college, and I was studying communication. And I was on the train. I was going to an internship I had downtown DC, and on the train there was an older gentleman, African-American guy, and I remember I was reading something on the train. It was some book for class. And he sparked up a conversation and was like, young man, what are you reading? You don't look like you're enjoying this. And I'm like, no, I'm not. This is not what I want. I don't enjoy this. And he says, do you want to know what I do? I said, well, sure, what? He says, I'm an English teacher, right? I said, oh, okay, well, great. He goes, but I used to be a pediatric cardiologist.
Wow.
And so I'm like, how does one go from being a pediatric cardiologist to being an English teacher? Those things don't relate.
Absolutely.
And what he said to me was, he believed that he knew that he was meant to help young people grow and develop. And he said that he originally thought that it was their hearts that he was supposed to work on. He was like, it was actually their minds. And he says, instead of like a operating room, I had a classroom. So he like flipped this metaphor on me for like how he went about doing the things in the world that he wanted to do, but doing it from a different way. And that would be my role, right? So as someone who, as an educator, I've never worked inside of a traditional school. I've never taught in a classroom with kids. I've worked at universities and have done things there, but in general, I've always worked outside of the box in education. And I think that that's sort of the way that works. And so from that moment is when I decided, I'm going to start doing things around education, but do it in a different kind of way, if that made sense.
No, it does. And actually, there's a question I'll ask after I ask Mr. Dorsey, because I know that teaching was not your original life plan, right? It was far from it. But I want you to talk about what you were doing or what your plan was before and how that plan changed into you becoming a math teacher.
Yeah, so Cory, I had many plans in college. I changed my major 3 times with this I had this really awesome advisor who would like he would talk to me about things that like where I wanted to go, how I wanted to get there. I'm sitting right next to him, and so I wanted to be an engineer. I just knew I was going to like change the world in that way. Chemical engineer, like I like science, I like math. I also wanted to be a musical theater major. And then I also really enjoyed just studying about social justice in general. So for me, what changed, I didn't know I was going to be a teacher still, like immediately, but what changed, like piqued my interest more when I took my first like elective class, my second year of school, and it was like a race and ethnicity class, and it was like all discussion based. Like there was like, it was like all about like how I interpreted the work of others.
Okay.
And it was very different than engineering classes where I was just doing homework and like learning how to solve like a certain problem a certain way and going to lab and then coming home and studying for like 17 hours in books that I didn't want to do, like studying, that sort of thing. But then I got to a point where I was like, I really, really enjoy studying about race and class and talking about social justice and empowering other people. So I got involved a lot at Penn State in those things. Then I found a job here in DC, also because of Tony.
Okay.
Who he brought me to an organization that worked in education, that did like curriculum writing, that really helped empower students to like learn about DC and to just really engage with their community in a meaningful way. And that was much different than what I could do as an engineer. And I had much more of a reach, I felt, in my like life's work, doing what I'm doing now.
Probably between 1% to 2% of all instructors are black males. I know what I felt when I saw a black teacher. I felt he got me. That no matter what circumstance I was in, he's either has seen it or has been in it. He can somehow speak my lingo, speak my language, or understand what I was saying, even if his goal was to teach me to speak better. And as I said in the intro, I felt mentored. I felt like I was part of the population. I want you guys to talk to me about those moments where you feel your impact with your students or with the people that you are teaching in the way that you do teach. What do you recognize as the impact of your presence as a black man, as a fully recognized black man, not just a teacher, in the presence of kids that feel that way?
That's a great question. The first, there are two things that are coming to my brain. It's interesting because, as Quay mentioned, Quay is a former student of mine, and by former student, again, I was not a traditional classroom teacher. I used to work at a university and run cultural programs on a college campus, and so I was doing things around race and diversity and social justice, etc. And Quay just happened to be one of those students who would come through the cultural center from time to time, and we just sort of began to develop this friendship, this bond. Undoubtedly, we were on a predominantly white campus. It's not many of us anyway. And by us, I mean not a lot of black men in general, right?
Okay.
And so I think that there was something about that initial connection of like, there's a younger me. Now he's taller, right? But there's a young black male there that reminds me of myself in terms of his passion, in terms of his scholarship, in terms of his intelligence. And he's also creative. He's a poet. Like I'm also a poet. And so to your point, yes, there's something about being able to like recognize yourself in another student. I think that's where there's some power. But I think if anything, what I feel the most, when I'm around a lot of young people, and I run after school programs. I've done college prep programs for kids here in DC. I run a program now where I hire individuals that work inside of DC high schools, and their jobs are to inspire kids to just pursue their passions and dreams.
Okay.
My point is, when I'm around young people, all it is, it's a feeling of love, like an actual, like, there's a feeling of love. It's like, Mr. Keith, like, I love you. Like, you never know, you might be the first person they've seen all day that gives you a hug, right? But there's something about being able to relate. And there's studies that show when kids can relate to their educators, they tend to do better academically.
Absolutely.
But to your point, because of that 1% to 2% black male educator statistic, the problem is I've only had maybe 3 black male educators in my entire life. right? And so because of that, I can only remember one who was revolutionary, who says, I know that most of your teachers are white and we're taking a history class, but we're going to write our own textbooks. You know what I mean? So like there was something revolutionary about him.
So to Quay, since your work is in an underserved area,
It was.
it was, I
Previously,
guess it,
yep.
it
Not
was.
my current position, yeah.
Okay. How do you view the impact of someone like you being in that area, serving in that role, and not just a teacher, but as I've read before, soul model?
I think impact it looks a lot of different ways, right? So I think first, kind of piggybacking off of Tony just a little bit, like there's something special about, and what you were saying too, Corey, like speaking the same language, under like walking down the hallway. Like one thing I did in my previous position a lot is like, and not even on purpose, but I reflect on it now, is like me and the boys from kindergarten to 5th grade, we didn't talk in the hallways, but we always nodded to each other. Like it was always like this essence of like what's up. We would always, and I wouldn't necessarily do that with all colleagues. I wouldn't necessarily do that with every student.
Right.
But it also wasn't on purpose that I was doing it to all the male students. It just felt like this connection. And also in a time where the narrative about people that look like me isn't the most positive, right? It's important for black boys to recognize that like there are people that look like you who become people like me. Like who grow up in neighborhoods like you and become people like me, become people like Tony, become people like Corey,
Absolutely.
right? And so just having them understand that there are people who really relate to you. And I was recently reading about the study that was done and how there are certain things like kids know what we teach them. So if I continue to teach children, like they only know what we teach them, right? So if I continue to teach them that, like if I put like all these doll babies, right, in this play area in a classroom, they're all white. I've taught that classroom something about what toys we play with and what is the popular toy. Or I've taught the classroom about then what's the popular narrative of the world. And it's things like that like my presence automatically adds without having to add black dolls, without having to, I'm an example of like, we are doing all kinds of things as black men. And you too, no matter where you're coming from, can do all kinds of things as a black boy. And despite the fact that you are not like in the mainstream. And then I guess the other impact is like academic stuff. But my most powerful, I feel like, it's just my impact on like how they feel as people and how like secure they feel.
So so we're going to go to a break, short break, but you don't want to miss this conversation, and we'll be right back.
Sometimes the things we do or say can make others feel hurt,
Such a weirdo.
excluded, or isolated. Everything you say and do creates an impact.
How am I supposed to save the whole world?
You can't think about saving the world. You have to think about saving one person.
Because of you, someone's entire life can change. You don't have to be a superhero to have a positive impact.
Friends?
Friends.
And we're back, and if you're just joining us, we're talking about black male teachers and their positive impact on those who they come in contact with. But not only that, in this segment, we're going to talk about how do we not only get more teachers and raise that 1% to 2%, but how do we retain them? So I want to ask you first, Tony, since we know this, this very low and sometimes dark number, what do you feel can be done to not only attract more black teachers, because I feel that it'll be highly impactful in the school system, what can we also do to make sure that they stay?
Complex question. I'm trying to give you the shortest answer possible. And I would say the first thing that we need to do is be mindful of history, right? And so when I say that is, there was a point in time where schools were racially segregated, right? So there was a point in time where black kids were going to schools with black educators, right? What happened after the Brown v. Board case is while schools began to be racially integrated, there was not much of a decision about what to do about the black educators. Where were they going to go, right? So so my point is we got to be mindful of history. Number one is that at one point, we did have black and brown
Right.
folks in classrooms as teachers, but
Absolutely.
that policy did not necessarily cover them, right? Then we also have to be mindful of like where a lot of black men are going. A lot of them are in prison or in jail or locked up or experiencing all sorts of transitions, right? So my thing is, I think the first thing is we have to be mindful that it's not a supply problem, it's a demand problem, right? And so what happens is a lot of these schools are not willing to hire a lot of these black men with all kinds of backgrounds, right?
Right.
So there's that, and then you have lots of other black men, I think, that are trying to find alternative paths to become teachers. But the other thing is, teaching is not really considered sexy anymore, right? I hope that's okay to say, but like I think there's something about, you know, when you talk to young black boys nowadays, none of them are really discussing, oh, I want to be an educator,
Absolutely.
right? So I think there's something about people like Quay and I making sure that, no, you could be an educator.
Right.
So, and I'll leave it at that, because I think that in terms of retaining teachers, I think there could be something to be said about the conditions of the school buildings in which they are teaching. Are they supportive? Are they conducive to black male survival? And I'm gonna pass the mic.
Well, you know, and it leads me
Or
into the question I was going to ask you, because at one point you were one of the teachers that was trying to leave your field in DC, and you were thinking about leaving. Now, I don't know if you were thinking about leaving the teaching field or just leaving where you were.
So yeah, and it was a hard thought, and I think that the article you're referring to, yeah, it kind of hints at that, but like it was hard for me. So it was me leaving that school.
Okay.
And it was just because the realities of that community were hard to deal with every single day. And you, as a teacher who taught in Ward 7, like, and you get to know the families and you get to know what's going on, and you really get to know your kids, and you get to know their situations, and that becomes a part of your thread of your life. And then you go home,
Yeah.
and then like you're feeling that all the time. And then, but also in the same token, you're feeling guilty. You're like, if I quit, am I quitting on them? I think I got to a point where I was quitting for me, so like I wouldn't quit on me.
Wow.
Because because I could have gotten to a point where I was like, I'm going to leave education, but I needed just a slow down break, just a break. I'm not saying where I'm teaching now is leaps and bounds better or worse, or I'm not making comparisons in that way. Instead, I'm saying that the conditions of the students in that community are just different than where I currently teach, by far.
Yeah, and so in my opinion, you know, as you said, you know, earlier, talking about teaching is not a sexy thing. You know, talking about teaching is not the thing that will get you the $500,000 house in Potomac, you know, in the first 5 years of your job. And like you were once thinking of being an engineer, and usually sometimes we don't look at teaching because it's not the lucrative career choice, although we may have a passion for it. But in my opinion, the salaries haven't risen with the times.
Well, interesting, in DC, I don't want to steal your joy, but DC teachers, if I'm not mistaken, make a lot more than most teachers like in the country, right? So there are teachers that are being paid really well. I think that where we falter, though, is we are not encouraging that as a career for young people to pursue when they're learning about careers inside of classrooms, right? I think that, or we're not teaching them that there are other ways to be educators, right? So it's like you could be a classroom teacher, but it's like, oh, but you could also run after school programs. You can work in nonprofits. You can do education in so many different ways. You could become a professor. You could be a researcher. You can, like, there are multiple ways to go about it. And I think that in itself, we've boxed education in as this very small profession. I don't think we allow young people to see all the different opportunities that are attached to it. So it's, yeah, not the sexiest career.
Well,
yeah.
Quay, and you also brought up something that I also feel, because I have two kids in the school system, and that when they're at school, they may inherit what they've been going through at home in my presence. And as a teacher sometimes, which isn't your job, but your passion is a student, so how could you not care about their condition of what they're going back home to after you teach them, or what they bring to you when they start the school day. You know, if a kid shows up hungry at school, you'll probably know it. If a kid shows
And I'll
up,
feed them.
yeah, and or else if a kid shows up in mental distress, you'll know it because of how they're acting in the class. So part of your job, if you need to reach that student, you have to know what you're reaching. And so it's that job that tends to force you to become not just a teacher, but a therapist, a sub-parent, and sometimes more parent than the students have at home. So how does that affect, and you've actually kind of talked about it where you wear that all day. How much does that play, well, how does it play into your decisions in terms of you staying or leaving in a certain position?
Well, it helps me think about how to take care of myself and how and where and what my limits are. Teaching has taught me, if nothing else, what my boundaries are in terms of my work-life balance, in terms of like how much I take care of me versus other people. Teaching has taught me that I cannot take care of other people if I'm not taking care of me. So it plays, to answer your question, it plays a great deal. Like that's you have to accept the fact that you're going to take on that position. You don't know it in your first year or your second year.
Absolutely.
But eventually, as you mature in your career, you realize that like this is a part of it. Like, and if that's not a part I want to accept right now, then I can't be a teacher, because so much of my job is social, emotional learning than teaching math.
So, and that drives a very important question. If you were talking to administration, whether on the school level or admin level, you spoke of work-life balance.
Yeah.
Do you feel that there needs to be more programs aimed at teachers to get that extra lift, such as therapy, such as moments where they can have their moments to, I guess, unwind all of that, and maybe you teach less hours in the day. Maybe there's something built into where that burnout doesn't happen in that way for you.
And I think so. And for me, that's not a conversation necessarily with admin or central office in a district. I think as a country, I'm going to be bold here. As a country, we haven't revamped our education system.
There we go.
I've been learning a lot recently about how education the whole system was built on the Industrial Revolution.
Yes.
And like we created a system where we were pushing kids and people out of just like the factories they were going to go work in.
Yes.
The factories they were going to go work in, right? We were pushing them in and out of the system. And then and what's interesting is that's not how school is today. That's not how kids are. That's not how the world is. Like, we're preparing kids for a much more robust world with such a wide range of opportunity. It's a much more diverse world where kids are, like, my school is extremely diverse, and where kids are going to school with people who look very different than them and have to learn, and their lifestyles at home are very different, but they have to come in this classroom, they have to be friends, and they have to interact with each other.
If I could add something,
please.
Not only do they have to be friends, but those young people are learning in an environment where the curriculum rarely reflects them also, right? I think that's also something really important to note, especially when educators are thinking about staying in a school building. If that school building is oppressing young people's intelligences, that's a lot of emotional work for an educator to do all the additional work.
Yeah, because you have to commit to teach something, knowing that either it should be extended or it's an error.
Yes.
It's an error.
Yes, and that is, it has emotionally, and I think that's one of the reasons why I've stayed outside of the classroom or the academy in that traditional sense, because I like some of the autonomy and freedom I have in some of these more community-based spaces. Because I'm like, oh, I can teach English, but I can teach it using hip hop. You know what I mean? Right. Or I've got a lot more flexibility than someone in a classroom would, but this is why this works really well, because it's the both and, right? When we think about achievement gaps or opportunity gaps, this partnership with in classroom and out of the classroom is what contributes to closing that gap.
Absolutely.
Like, our young people need the both and, but they don't always have access to those resources, let alone Black educators, So.
But here's an honest question I want to ask both of you. First thing is, you're a man. Second, you're Black. When you step into any situation, do you innately feel that you have to perform at a higher level than your counterparts of either a different sex or a different race? And does that pressure ever mount up to stress?
I'm going to answer this really quickly because I feel like Quay has a lot more to say on this, but I'm also in the last semester of my PhD, right? And I'm at a predominantly white institution, and I'm the only black person in any of my classes, right? And I'm studying race and education. So yes, it's called the black tax. Like I without a doubt feel like that I have to do more because I'm still operating at a gap. I still didn't learn all the things that I should have learned in the way that I should have at the same rate with the same resources as my white counterparts, right? So I'm in a PhD program with a bit of a gap in my learning, right? And so having to fill that gap and continue to learn more, it's literally considered a black tax. So yes, and is it stressful? Yes, yes. And think again, I'm a PhD student. Can you imagine a third grader?
Right.
I made it a point to like bring that into our curriculum to like use to like study a newspaper together and read that newspaper and come up with a theme of what the story was talking about and answer questions and write our own journalistic perspective of what actually happened in the Mike Brown case after watching I think like 10 cell phone videos of like things that were happening. And like after that, that's when I started to feel like, and that was in the early stages of my career, I started to feel like, oh wow, like that's, like this is how I show up as a culturally relevant educator in the classroom for my black students and really for all students living in Ward 7 whose reality is very similar to the folks who are living in Ferguson.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I wish I had more time to talk to you guys because
It's over? Not ready.
No, because the conversation shouldn't be over. So, and this is a conversation as we do on the show is to spark the conversation, and so people can have these conversations at their schools. Have them with their school-age students as well too. But I want to thank both of you for taking time out to lend to this subject your expertise and your knowledge. And I know that you don't hear it often, but I thank you for existing. And I appreciate you for existing enough for my kids to see that we add value everywhere, everywhere that we go and every place that we touch. And so guys, until next time. And so unfortunately, that's all we have for you today on this subject, but you could have this conversation at home with your kids or in your classroom. And to follow us, make sure you follow us on Instagram at One-on-One with Cory, or follow me on Twitter at Cory George Media. And until next time, take care of yourself like you hope that I do. Bye.